Tonight, the quiet of winter holds a weight you can almost feel pressing down, and the shadows seem to stretch a little longer than they should. Some nights leave marks you can't see, memories that won't let go, and moments that make every creak and whisper feel like a warning. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like, and share this video with anyone who loves a true chill down the spine. Comment below if something like this has ever unsettled you. I'd love to hear your stories. Now let's step into the darkness together and see what waits just beyond the edge of the light. I remember thinking Salem would be a harmless getaway for the holidays. Something quaint and festive, a town that wore its eerie history like a tourist badge rather than a curse. It was New Year's Eve, and the streets were mostly empty. The shops and museums had closed hours earlier, leaving behind only faint glows from the occasional lantern or crooked lamppost. I had wandered here alone, partly for the thrill, partly because I was drawn to old towns when everyone else was hiding from the cold. The air had that biting edge that seems sharper when the world is silent, and the fog, just enough to blur edges, clung low to the cobblestone streets. At first, everything seemed innocent enough. The whispering was subtle, barely noticeable at first, like someone clearing their throat behind a wall. I chalked it up to the wind weaving through the narrow streets, bouncing off brick and mortar, but it didn't feel right. The whispers didn't scatter. They followed. They lingered just at the edge of hearing, forming shapes and syllables that made my skin prickle. As I walked further down the narrow street, the shadows began to act strangely. I stopped at one point, convinced I was imagining it, but the long, dark fingers of shade stretched unnaturally across the cobblestones, moving in ways the faint light shouldn't allow. It was subtle at first, a flicker here, a bend there, but as I kept moving, the effect became undeniable. The shadows weren't cast by streetlights or building. They were independent, almost alive, reaching into the empty corners where no light touched. I told myself it was a trick of the eye, a misalignment of memory and expectation. After all, Salem had always carried that reputation for being haunted, and a solitary stroll in a near-empty town at midnight could unhinge anyone's senses. Then the whispers changed. They became clearer, more deliberate. They weren't just sound. They carried intent. At first, I couldn't understand the words, just the cadence, like a lullaby that's just a note off key. Then, distinctly, I heard my name. First softly, barely audible, as if the wind were testing me. Then louder, almost coaxing, like someone breathing right next to my ear. I stopped dead in the middle of the street, my hands trembling, trying to rationalize what I was hearing. There was no one around, not a single passerby, no stray cat, nothing but the occasional flicker of a street lamp. And yet, the whispers persisted, repeating my name with a rhythm that felt wrong, unhuman. I turned down a narrow alley, hoping the sound would fade, that I could shake this growing dread by changing direction, but the alley was darker than any street should be. The brick walls seemed to lean inward, pressing in, and the fog had thickened into a viscous cloud, obscuring the far end. That's when I noticed them, shadowy figures, hunched or draped over themselves, standing motionless. At first I thought they were statues, some leftover tourist decoration meant to spook the overly curious, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized these figures were subtly moving, not walking or gesturing like humans do, but breathing, shifting, almost like echoes trapped in the wrong place, stretching into the present without the constraints of flesh and bone. I froze. My mouth went dry. My heart thumped painfully, the rhythm echoing against the brick walls. Something about them was wrong, fundamentally wrong. They weren't alive in any conventional sense, yet they weren't dead either. Their forms flickered as though struggling to hold shape in the thickened fog, melting in and out of existence. They didn't approach me, but they didn't need to. The awareness of their gaze pressed down on me, a sensation of being measured, evaluated. I wanted to run, but even as my legs itched to move, a deeper part of me was rooted to the ground. I tried to call out, tried to ask if anyone was there, but my voice refused to come. Only the whispers answered. My name again, followed by a wordless sigh, a vibration that crawled up my spine and lodged itself behind my eyes. Finally, I bolted. My feet slammed against cobblestones as I ran, zigzagging through streets I thought I knew. But the town had changed. Buildings looked different. Doors that should have led to cafes now opened onto walls, narrow lanes twisted in impossible angles, and every corner I turned seemed to fold back into itself. The whispers followed, sometimes behind, sometimes ahead, always just out of reach. And the footsteps, oh, the footsteps, not my own, soft, measured, mismatched to my panic, echoing around corners and through alleys that I didn't even remember walking into. I told myself to keep moving, to not look back, but every instinct screamed that if I stopped or faltered, whatever this was would catch me. At some point, I stumbled into the main square, the place I'd started from hours ago. For a second, it looked normal again, well, as normal as Salem could be at night in winter. But the calm was a lie. The whispers had stopped, but the sense of being watched hadn't left. I scanned the square, searching for movement, for a shadow, a sign, anything that would make the terror rationale. There was nothing, just the stillness, a deceptive quiet that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I kept moving through the square, my breath steaming in the cold air, but the feeling clung to me as if unseen eyes followed my every step. I tried to convince myself that daylight would solve everything, that this was just a dream, a trick of exhaustion and imagination. But even when the first hints of morning light touched the streets, I felt the town watching. People returned gradually, shuffling into shops and homes, but the emptiness of the night lingered like a stain. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those shadowy figures, their forms half melted, faces blurred yet painfully familiar, whispering my name. I could hear them even through the hum of traffic and casual chatter, faint, insistent, calling me back to those narrow streets. Sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the old wooden floors in my inn sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind against the window pane carried the faint echo of my name. I tried to talk to people, but the words fell flat. Who would believe me? Tourists talk about haunted Salem every year. A few kitschy stories, a few staged scare tours. But I wasn't talking about a display. I was talking about something real, something that had followed me, something that existed in the spaces between light and shadow where no human should dwell. The days that followed were a haze of anxiety and paranoia. I avoided the streets I had wandered, but even in my inn I felt their presence. Mirrors reflected more than my own face. Shadows lingered where they shouldn't. Faint whispers threaded through the hum of conversation on the street outside. It wasn't always at night. Sometimes it was the quietest moment in the day, a lull when no one else seemed aware. A breeze passing through an open window, a sudden chill, and then the softest sound. My name. I thought I could escape it by leaving Salem, driving hours away, breathing the air of somewhere else. But the feeling followed. It wasn't just a town that had marked me. It was something in me now, lodged deep where reason and fear meet. Even weeks later, I'd catch myself scanning corners, checking shadows, hearing the faintest whisper that might not even exist. I have no idea what I encountered that night. People have explanations, echoes, acoustics, shadows playing tricks. But none of that fits what I felt. None of it explains the figures I saw, the sense of being measured, watched, stalked in a place I thought I knew. It wasn't playful. It wasn't mischievous. It was patient, deliberate, and it waited for me to notice. For me to walk into the streets alone, for me to hear my name and understand I wasn't alone in Salem after midnight. And the strangest part, I think it still waits. Every New Year's Eve, when the streets grow quiet and the town folds into itself under fog and frost, I remember those shadows. I remember the whispers. I remember the feeling of being unseen yet known, invisible yet tracked. And I wonder who else will hear their name echoing off the brick walls, who else will wander those narrow alleys, thinking it's just history, just fun, just a harmless stroll through a town that wears its past lightly. I know better now. I know there are parts of Salem that are not meant to be understood, not meant to be rationalized. And if you're ever there at midnight, walking alone, listen closely. If you hear your name whispered on the wind, don't ignore it. Don't run blindly. Just remember, the shadows are patient and they know you've noticed them. Even now, years later, the memory clings. I see shapes in darkened corners, subtle movements at the edge of vision, the faintest echo of a name I hope I never hear again. And part of me knows that no matter where I go, that night in Salem has left something behind. Something that won't rest, something that waits, something patient, deliberate, and unseen, just like it was in those fog-choked streets, calling, always calling, my name. I didn't mean to seek out trouble. I was just looking for a quiet place to spend New Year's Eve, somewhere off the usual tourist paths, a place with history and character, a little charm that wasn't overrun with tourists. Savannah seemed perfect. Its streets were lined with centuries-old buildings, their brickwork darkened with age, and the kind of moss-draped oaks you only see in the South, their branches tangled like long, gray hair over cobblestone streets. I'd read about an old inn tucked on one of the quieter streets, a place called the Candler House. It promised charm and whispered tales of ghostly residents. I didn't believe in hauntings. Never had. But there was a thrill in staying somewhere with a story, and besides, the pictures looked beautiful. Warm lamplight spilling across polished wooden floors, the scent of old wood and wax. A wrought iron railing along the staircase. When I arrived, the inn's exterior was even more captivating than the photos. The brick had darkened with age, the corners softened by decades of rain and sun, and a thin layer of mist hung low over the street. I parked my car in the small lot out front and walked up to the door, my footsteps echoing faintly in the empty street. A bell jingled as I entered, and I was met with the scent of old wood, dust, and something faintly sweet, like a candle long burned down but never replaced. The lobby was small, lined with worn velvet chairs and faded wallpaper curling at the edges. Behind a front desk cluttered with papers and a few antique trinkets, a wiry old man looked up. His eyes were pale, almost gray, and his beard, neatly tucked into his collar, gave him an austere, sharp look. "Evening," he said, voice low and rough, carrying the weight of someone used to speaking to ghosts as much as people. "You here for the room?" "Yes," I said, handing over my ID. He nodded, rifled through a set of brass keys, and handed me one on a small worn key ring. "Third floor, room 7. Rooms tend to get restless around this time of year," he muttered, eyes glancing to the ceiling like he expected something to answer back. I laughed politely, thinking it was a local joke to entertain tourists, and went on my way. The staircase creaked under my weight, old wood protesting each step. On the 3rd floor, the hallway stretched longer than I expected, dimly lit by sconces along the walls. The carpet was thick, matted in places, and the faint smell of dust and wax followed me down the hall. Room 7 was at the far end, a heavy wooden door with a brass knob polished smooth from decades of use. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me, and immediately felt the difference. The room was small, maybe 20 feet across, with a large window overlooking the quiet street below. The bed was neatly made, an old-fashioned quilt folded at the foot, and a lamp with a shade patterned in faded floors cast a soft glow over the room. The first hours were quiet, too quiet. I unpacked slowly, laying my jacket over the chair, setting my bag on the desk. Outside, the street was empty except for a stray cat that paused to glance up at my window before disappearing into the mist. I tried to immerse myself in the calm, reminding myself that I had a long drive behind me, that I was tired, that there was no reason to imagine anything was wrong. I made some tea, settled into the chair by the window, and let the silence of the old building fill me. It wasn't until the clock edged closer to 11:30 that things started to shift. At first, it was subtle, faint knocks from the wall behind the bed. I paused, listening, assuming it was plumbing or maybe another guest moving furniture. The sound was irregular at first, a soft tapping, but then it became deliberate, rhythmic, almost like someone was counting with their knuckles. I froze, staring at the wall, trying to convince myself it was imagination. Then came the whispering, low, muffled, almost like a chant. It wasn't words I could understand, but it had a cadence that made my skin crawl. I held my breath, listening, telling myself it had to be someone else in the building. Maybe the old inn had hidden passages, maybe staff moved at odd hours. But the whispers didn't come from a hallway. They came from inside the room, pressed against the walls, seeping into the corners. I told myself it was in my head. I closed my eyes, counting silently, trying to ground myself, but the tapping persisted, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. My stomach tightened. I needed my phone. I reached for it, only to find the battery dead. Nothing. No light, no connection, no reassurance. My fingers trembled as I dropped it back onto the desk. Then I saw it, a shadow detaching itself from the corner of the room, stretching toward the door as if it didn't want me to leave. I couldn't tell if it was human, animal, or something in between, only that it moved with intent. My heart pounded, a rapid, uncontrollable rhythm that seemed to echo the tapping in the walls. The air around me turned icy, my breath suddenly visible in the dim lamplight, curling upward like smoke. I tried to speak, to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. The knocking grew louder, heavier, closer. It wasn't random anymore. It had a pattern, a beat, deliberate and menacing. I felt the shadow's gaze on me, a weight pressing down, making it hard to move, hard to think. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to obey. I wanted to believe it was some trick of the light, some corner of the inn settling, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I edged toward the door, hand trembling on the knob, heart hammering in my ears. Then the door creaked open on its own. I didn't hesitate. I bolted down the hall, my feet barely touching the worn carpet, the whispers fading but never fully disappearing, lingering in the air behind me. The staircase groaned beneath my weight, the old wood protesting every step. I could feel the presence behind me, following, though I didn't dare look back. The lobby was empty, silent except for the faint hum of the heating system. I ran through it, my footsteps echoing off the high ceiling, and threw open the front door. The streets outside were quiet, mist curling around the streetlights like smoke. Savannah looked normal, peaceful even, but I couldn't shake the certainty that something had followed me. I glanced over my shoulder, catching only the empty street, yet the feeling of being watched didn't leave me. I kept moving, walking briskly through the narrow streets, past the moss-covered squares and gas lamps. Every shadow seemed too dark, every corner too deep. I didn't stop until I reached my car, parked just down the block. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys, half expecting to see that shadow looming over me. When the engine finally roared to life, I didn't wait for the lights to brighten the street. I drove off, headlights cutting through the fog, heart still racing. Even days later, I couldn't shake it. The memory of that room, the knocking, the whispering, the shadow stretching across the floor, haunted me. I tried to tell myself it was exhaustion, imagination, the natural creaks of an old building playing tricks on my mind. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. That room wasn't empty, and whatever it was, it had wanted me to stay. And though I left Savannah behind, the memory followed me. Sometimes at night when the house is quiet and the lights are dim, I swear I can still hear faint tapping from behind the walls. And I wonder if it will ever let me go. The worst part is the certainty. The creeping, lingering certainty that it wasn't just a figment of my imagination, that the world has corners we aren't meant to see, and that some of those corners watch us back. I never returned to the Candler house. I've avoided old inns, creaking staircases, quiet streets lined with mossy oaks. But in the back of my mind, I know I'll never be completely free of it. There's a kind of horror in that realization. One that doesn't scream, one that doesn't chase, but one that waits, patient and cold, in the dark corners of your memory. Sometimes, late at night, I think I hear a faint knock on my bedroom wall, rhythmic, deliberate, followed by a whisper I almost recognize. And I can't help but wonder if, somehow, that shadow is still out there, waiting for the next New Year's Eve to find someone else who thinks a story is just a story, someone who doesn't believe, someone like me. I remember that night like it's etched into my bones, every detail replaying itself when the wind howls through empty streets, carrying the scent of frost and decay. I had driven up into Pennsylvania's forgotten rail lines, the kind that never see a train anymore, just rust and silence stretching as far as the eye could reach. It was New Year's Eve, but out there, in that abandoned yard, the world felt like it had stopped entirely. I was drawn to the place for its quiet, the way the snow settled on the jagged edges of rusted cars, how the tracks disappeared into nothing, like frozen veins leading somewhere unknown. My camera hung heavy around my neck, and I spent hours wandering the snow-dusted rows, capturing the frost-crusted wheels, the graffiti scrawled in bold, chipped colors, and the eerie patterns the ice made over forgotten platforms. It was beautiful in a way that made your chest tighten, like looking at something that had been left behind for decades and knew things you didn't. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. The wind had been gentle at first, a whisper through the cars, but as midnight crept closer, the yard began to feel different. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, stretching across the snow in ways that didn't match the faint moonlight. I noticed them out of the corner of my eye first, moving, or maybe flickering, between the rusted cars. Each time I turned to look directly, there was nothing. My fingers tightened on the camera, and I tried to shake off the sense that I was being watched. But the sounds started then. Not the wind, not the creak of metal under snow, but the soft, deliberate scrape of steel, like something, or someone, was brushing past the edges of the cars as I moved. I froze. My stomach sank. Curiosity won over fear, the same way it always does when something feels wrong. I followed the noise, stepping carefully over frozen debris, loose boards, and ice-crusted rail ties, trying to see where it came from. The scrape came again, closer now, echoing faintly through the cavern of derelict cars. Then I saw them, or what I think were people. They were hunched over in the snow near the tracks where the metal had warped and split under years of neglect. At first, I thought they were mannequins or some sort of abandoned work crew left behind, like ghosts frozen in mid-action. But the way they moved, or didn't move, was wrong. Their heads were low, shoulders hunched in a way that made them seem smaller. Broken almost. I could see pale skin beneath layers of ragged clothing, and their faces, when I dared to glance, were obscured by shadow, smeared with grime and frost. They didn't acknowledge me, didn't flinch, didn't even breathe in a way I could see, but I could feel them. The air thickened around me, almost pressing in, and it was like the yard itself was holding its breath. Every instinct told me to back away slowly, to retreat to the road and the warmth of the town I'd left behind. But the curiosity, and maybe something darker, some foolish need to witness what I wasn't meant to see, kept me rooted in place. I started to back up anyway, and that's when I realized the shadows were moving toward me. Not running, not walking, but sliding, almost gliding over the snow. My heart hit my ribs hard, and suddenly every crunch of frozen ground underfoot sounded deafening. I turned and ran, my legs burned, lungs screaming, breath clouding in front of my face. Behind me, the scrape of metal, the whisper of fabric across steel, and the soft, wet thud of movement on snow followed me relentlessly. Every time I dared to look over my shoulder, the figures, or the shadows of them, kept pace, keeping distance just enough that I couldn't see clearly, couldn't identify them fully, couldn't reassure myself that they were human. The yard seemed to stretch endlessly, the tracks looping in ways that didn't make sense, snow-laden rail ties rising and falling like a frozen wave beneath my boots. I slipped, hands clawing at snow, and the shadows didn't hesitate. They stopped just short of me, and for a second, I thought I felt cold. Fingers brushed my shoulder, though when I glanced back, there was nothing but the empty, frost-crusted ground. I ran until the lights of the town shimmered ahead, a weak promise of warmth and safety. As soon as I crossed the threshold into streets lined with houses celebrating the new year, the oppressive presence lifted. No figures, no whispers, no scraping metal. Just the distant firework pops and laughter of people unaware of the frozen horror tucked into the tracks behind them. But I couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't left, not really. That night, I kept hearing it in my dreams, the shuffle, the scrape, the heavy breathing of something waiting beyond the edge of civilization. I swear, sometimes, when I drive past old rail lines on the outskirts of Pennsylvania, I catch a glimpse of hunched shapes in the snow, frozen in the same grotesque, human-like posture. And I can't tell if it's memory or if they are still out there, waiting for the next fool to wander too close. The wind through those forgotten yards carries their scent, iron and frost and decay, and it makes my skin crawl. Even now, thinking back, I can feel the weight of that silence pressing in, the way the night held its breath as I ran. It's a feeling that stays with you, a reminder that some places in the world are abandoned, not because no one cares, but because something is still living in the shadows, keeping watch. And sometimes, if you're unlucky, it notices you too. Even with the town behind me, I couldn't stop replaying the scene in my mind. The shapes hunched over in the snow. The way their heads tilted almost unnaturally toward the tracks, as if listening for something only they could hear. Their stillness wasn't peace. It was a predator's patience. I tried to rationalize it during the days that followed, convincing myself it must have been some homeless people, or perhaps drifters seeking shelter in the abandoned cars. But none of the usual signs were there. No footprints leading away, no discarded belongings, no indication they had moved at all. And the memory of the way the shadows kept pace with me, silent yet inexorably advancing, made logic feel irrelevant. That night, the snow seemed heavier, the air colder, and the stars themselves distant, indifferent. I replayed every step, every footfall on the icy tracks, imagining that if I had turned left instead of right, I would have fallen into their waiting. Some part of me still feels that way. Some part knows that the tracks are lined with more than rust and snow, that the yard holds its secrets tightly, and that the new year doesn't wash them away. I tried to photograph the scene again in my mind, piecing together the shapes and their slow, deliberate movements. It's impossible to capture what isn't meant to be seen, what dissolves when you confront it head-on. Each time I close my eyes, I see them hunched in the snow, shivering yet perfectly still, faces shadowed yet familiar in some distorted way, like echoes of humanity left behind. I don't know why they were there, or what they wanted. I don't know if they were ever human in the way I am, or if the yard itself had warped them into something else entirely. All I know is the weight of that silence. The way the wind carried the scrape of metal long after I had left, and the way my pulse still hammers whenever I drive past abandoned tracks. I've tried to tell friends about it, but no one believes the way I describe it. The unnatural stillness, the creeping shadows, the way the air itself seemed to clutch at me. They think I'm exaggerating, letting fear twist memory. Maybe I am, but I've felt it too many times since, in the corner of a frozen field, in the half-light of a forest path, in the quiet between New Year's fireworks. They are out there, patient, hunched, watching. And the moment you notice them, the moment you truly see, you become part of their waiting. I don't go to abandoned rail yards anymore. I don't wander near tracks lined with frost or derelict cars, but the memory follows me. The way they moved, or didn't move. The way the snow seemed to absorb my footsteps, but still betray my presence. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear a scraping, a whisper of something shifting just beyond the edge of light. I look, of course I do, but nothing's ever there until you think it should be. And then you feel the weight, the eyes you cannot see, the patience of something ancient and human-shaped, waiting. And in those moments, you understand, some places are abandoned for a reason. Some shadows are never meant to be chased away. Some memories cling to you like frost, biting and relentless, marking you in ways no one else can ever understand. By the time I finally feel safe, the terror doesn't end. It just lingers, a quiet hum beneath every sound, a shadow at the periphery of every winter landscape. I can't tell if I was lucky or cursed that night, but I can tell you this. When you wander into the silence of abandoned places, when you chase the beauty of rust and frost, remember that there are watchers. And if you meet them, they don't run, they wait. I remember that night in Boston like it happened yesterday, even though it's been years. I'd always been drawn to the old clock tower downtown, the one that looms over the city like a forgotten sentinel, its stone face blackened by centuries of soot and weather. Every New Year's Eve, the streets below filled with celebration, fireworks, laughter, and the kind of clamor that made your chest thrum. But I didn't want that. I wanted distance, a place to watch it all unfold from above, to be a silent observer of the chaos and joy beneath. The tower had no entry signs nailed to its doors, some faded beyond legibility, others still bright and clear, but I ignored them. The thrill of climbing that narrow, iron-wound staircase, the echo of my own footsteps against stone walls, was too intoxicating to resist. The air inside was thick with dust and a musty, almost metallic smell, and the quiet pressed against my eardrums like a living thing, almost heavy enough to make it hard to breathe. Each step I took seemed to echo in slow motion. The higher I climbed, the narrower the stairs became, twisting in ways that didn't make sense, as if the tower itself was reshaping around me. My hand brushed the cold, rough stone of the walls for balance, and I could feel patches of mold, the dampness of years settling deep into the cracks. Somewhere above, the faint, persistent tick of the clock began to intrude on my awareness, a rhythmic, unrelenting reminder that time itself was alive in this place. I reached a landing where the light from the city spilled in through narrow slits of glass, the orange and red of fireworks already starting to pulse against the sky. I paused to catch my breath, to admire the view, and that's when I noticed it. The gears. The old, massive gears of the clock, coated in grime, hanging in the shadows, as still as stone at first. But then, almost imperceptibly, they began to move, creaking softly at first, like a groan of wood and metal. My stomach clenched. The sound shouldn't have been possible. No one had wound the clock in decades. The creaking grew louder, a slow, laborious rhythm that echoed in the hollow space, vibrating against my chest. And then, without warning, the first chime rang out. It wasn't the pleasant, clear tone I'd expected. It was fractured, jagged, like the sound of metal tearing through air. The second chime followed, louder, and then the third, each one filling the tower until it felt like the walls themselves were shaking. Shadows stretched across the stone surfaces, long, twitching, as if the light of the city and the faint glow from the gears themselves were bending unnaturally. I tried to tell myself it was just the acoustics, that my imagination was playing tricks, but I could feel it, the presence of something else, unseen but aware. A sudden brush of cold against my arm made me jump. I spun around, heart hammering, but there was nothing there. No one had followed me. The staircase was empty, the tower silent again, save for the chimes. The sound, though, wasn't just echoing. It was pleading, fragmented, like a voice trapped in metal and time. I put my hands over my ears, but it penetrated anyway, reverberating through my skull, deep into my bones. My breath came in ragged gasps, and my eyes darted around, trying to find the source. The shadows seemed to pulse, moving independently of the single light source that spilled in from the windows. Something about the air had changed, heavier now, thick like molasses, pressing in on me from all sides. The chimes continued, relentless, each one louder than the last. I noticed the gears now weren't just moving, they were moving on their own accord, almost deliberately. The pendulums swung in uneven arcs, clanging against the metal frame in ways that shouldn't have been possible. The clock hands jerked and twisted, as if animated by some unseen force, pointing in no real direction, and I felt a gnawing fear settle in my stomach, a realization that I was witnessing something that had no place in reality. Then, over the final, deafening chime, I heard it, my name, whispered, hollow, distant, but unmistakable. Slan! It lingered in the air, echoing off the walls, curling around the shadows like smoke. My skin crawled. I wanted to scream, but the sound stuck in my throat. The voice wasn't angry or threatening in the usual sense. It was patient, insistent, intimate in a way that made my blood run cold. Every instinct in me screamed to flee. I bolted. Down the staircase, my hands scraping along the stone walls, my legs trembling under the weight of sheer panic. The narrow steps seemed to elongate, twisting unnaturally as if the tower itself were trying to trap me, to keep me inside with that voice and the broken chimes. Each step I took echoed back at me, distorted, mingling with the memory of that whispered name. I didn't stop to look back. I didn't slow down. When I finally burst through the heavy doors at the base of the tower, the noise of the city hit me like a wave. Fireworks cracked overhead, laughter and shouting filled the streets, but none of it reached me. My chest heaved, my hands shook, and I realized my heart hadn't slowed since the moment the first chime fractured the silence. I glanced up at the tower. It looked like any other old building in Boston, silent and imposing, the stone face dark against the night sky. But I knew what it held. I knew what had happened inside. Even now, years later, I can't walk past that tower without feeling it, the oppressive presence of that place pressing on my shoulders. Sometimes, when I'm alone in a quiet room, I swear I can hear it. The faint, fractured chimes, slow and laborious, moving through the air as if testing whether I'm listening. And I still hear my name, whispered softly in the dead of night. It doesn't want to harm me, I think. At least not in the way you'd expect. It just wants acknowledgement, recognition, a witness. I never climbed the tower again, not even during daylight, not even when no one was around. Friends would ask why I avoided it, and I'd smile and shrug, call it superstition, the imagination running wild. But that's not it. What I experienced in that clock tower isn't superstition, it isn't imagination. I don't know what it was. Some anomaly of sound and time, or something older, something patient, but it was real. And it knows me. Every year on New Year's Eve, I feel it waiting. I hear it in the quiet tick of a clock, in the wind rattling against window panes, in shadows that stretch just a little too long. It waits. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed, if I'd listened instead of running. I don't think it would have harmed me, not in a way anyone could understand. But I think it would have wanted more. My attention, my acknowledgement, maybe even my presence. I imagine it now, moving those gears in the darkness, the fractured chimes filling the tower, waiting for another fool to climb its narrow staircase, ignoring the no entry signs, seeking a view, seeking something they can't name. And I feel a pang of sorrow for them because there's no joy to be found up there. Only time, old and patient, and the sound of a voice calling through the void. I can't explain why I didn't tell anyone what happened that night. How could I? No one would believe me. And even if they did, how could they feel it? The suffocating silence before the chimes, the way the shadows moved with intention, the cold that isn't just air but something alive brushing against your skin. These things can't be put into words. I've tried countless times, but the memory resists translation. It is bigger than language, older than reason, and it doesn't let go. I've never forgotten the last chime, the way it shook the tower as if shaking something loose inside me. And that whisper, my name, stretching on the air long after the sound should have faded. Sometimes, late at night, I can swear I feel that brush of cold on my arm again, soft as a feather but cutting as ice. And in that instant, I remember the stairs, the gears, the shadows, and I know without a doubt that the tower is still waiting, still alive, still listening, and it remembers me too. I don't go downtown much anymore, not past that area, not when the old clock tower is in sight. But even from a distance, I feel it. It calls, patient, fractured, and I can't ignore it. And I'm not sure I want to know what would happen if I didn't. I had always been the kind of person who laughed off local legends. Ghost stories, haunted bridges, old river curses. They were all just the sort of tales people told to scare each other or make the night feel longer. Even so, I had heard whispers about the old bridge on the outskirts of New Orleans, the one they said carried a lingering weight of something unnatural, something that waited for the living to wander too close. It was New Year's Eve, and the city was alive with the usual chaos. Music, fireworks, shouting, and the smell of smoke and fried food that drifted through the streets. I drove out of the heart of it, past the neon and the crowds, and into the stillness that clung to the far reaches of the river. The road narrowed, the streetlights grew sparse, and the kind of darkness that feels heavy settled in around me, pressing against the windshield. I laughed at myself, telling myself I was letting imagination run too far, that the bridge was just another old piece of infrastructure with a creepy story attached. But as I pulled up to it, the air felt wrong in a way I couldn't name, thick with moisture and a faint tang of decay, and the river below was black and still, reflecting what little moonlight had pushed through the clouds. The bridge itself was ancient, its iron girders rusted, the paint peeling, the wood underfoot creaking like it was sighing beneath every step. I parked a few feet from the edge and stepped out of the car, the cold air instantly biting through my jacket. The silence hit first, Not the kind of quiet you can explain with distance from the city, but a heavier, almost expectant quiet, like the world was holding its breath. As I walked toward the center of the bridge, each step made the boards groan, sending shivers up my spine. I forced myself to focus on the river, trying to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, trying to rationalize the unease as nerves and the height of the night. That's when I noticed them. Figures, standing perfectly still at the edge of the river, their shapes pale against the black water. They didn't move when I approached, didn't react to the sound of my footsteps, didn't even seem to breathe, and yet I felt it. That terrible sensation of being watched, of eyes drilling into me from the shadows. My skin crawled, and a cold sweat broke out along my back. The figures seemed ordinary at first glance. Maybe homeless people, or children playing in the dark. But something about the stillness, the rigidity, was wrong. I raised my flashlight, the beam cutting through the mist that hovered above the water, and the light landed on the figures. They were gone, vanished. In their place were footprints in the muddy bank, trailing out from the water like they had risen straight from it, ending abruptly as if whoever had made them had been plucked from the ground. My pulse hammered in my ears. I stepped backward, trying to convince myself I was seeing things, that my eyes were playing tricks in the darkness. But then I heard it, faint, carried on the wind, almost beneath the sound of the river, like soft, muffled cries. Not human voices exactly, but something that wobbled on the edge of recognition, the kind of sound that sticks in your memory and leaves you replaying it long after it's gone. I turned my flashlight across the bridge and the riverbank, scanning for movement, for explanation, but there was nothing. Only the footprints, jagged and incomplete, like a frozen record of something unexplainable. My stomach tightened, my chest aching with a sudden, irrational fear. The wind shifted, and with it came a whisper, a breath so close it grazed the back of my neck. It was a word or a string of words, I couldn't tell which, but it was unmistakably meant for me. My head whipped around, heart hammering, eyes wide, expecting to see someone standing there, waiting. But the bridge was empty, only the sound of the river, black and silent, mocking me with its placid surface. I stumbled back toward my car, not daring to look behind, each step urgent and clumsy, my boots slipping on the slick boards. By the time I reached the safety of the passenger door, my hands were shaking so violently I could barely fumble the keys. I got inside, locked the doors, and sat with the engine running, trying to steady myself, trying to force rational thought into the terror gripping my mind. I told myself it was over, that nothing had happened, that I had imagined it. And for a while, the hum of the idling engine and the muted city in the distance calmed me. But even as I drove away, the weight of something unseen pressed against the back of my mind. Every so often, I thought I saw shapes at the river's edge in the periphery of my vision, shadows that didn't belong to anything in the world I knew. The thought made my stomach knot. I told myself to ignore it, to laugh it off, to forget that anything had happened at all. The next day, I tried to go about my life as normal. But the memory of the bridge and the figures haunted me. I avoided the river. I avoided streets that ran near bridges. I avoided nighttime altogether. But sleep brought no respite. Dreams carried the same still figures, their eyes blank yet accusatory, standing at the water's edge, the cries echoing through my skull. I would wake in the early hours, heart hammering, the sound of water in my ears, though I was nowhere near it. Each time I drifted back to sleep, I felt them closer, as if waiting, patient and silent, for something I couldn't name. Weeks later, I found myself driving through another part of the city, another river cutting through the streets, and the feeling returned. That same icy presence at my back, That sensation of being watched, the subtle shift of air that whispered things just beyond comprehension. My hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles white, and I forced myself to look straight ahead, praying I wouldn't see shadows moving at the edges of my vision. The bridge itself had etched itself into my memory like a scar, a wound that wouldn't heal. And though I never returned to it, though I told myself I was safe, I felt the pull of it, the memory of the figures, the cold, the cries, lingering in every riverbank I passed, every stretch of water I glimpsed from a car window. The strangest part is how ordinary it felt, even in memory. The cars passing by, the distant hum of the city, the moon reflecting faintly off the water. But beneath it, always, there was that undertow of something unknowable. I began to notice it in small, subtle ways. A shadow that lingered too long. A sound in the wind that shouldn't be there. The way the river seemed to hold its breath when I drove past. Friends laughed when I told them, brushed it off as overactive imagination, but I knew what I had felt, knew what I had seen. It wasn't just a story. It was a weight, a presence, patient and unrelenting. Every New Year's Eve, I find myself thinking of that bridge. I imagine the figures waiting, still and silent, their eyes following me, even from some impossible distance. I try to convince myself that I am imagining it, that the mind plays tricks when faced with isolation, darkness, and old stories. But the truth is, I feel it. A chill that starts at the base of my skull and spreads through my body, the hairs on my arms standing on end, the sense that the water is alive and watching. And I know deep down that it will always be waiting, for me or for someone else, ready to remind the living that some places are not meant to be crossed, some nights not meant to be walked alone, and some eyes never stop following. Even now, when I drive past a bridge, when I catch sight of the river glinting faintly under moonlight, I grip the wheel tighter. I remember the creak of the boards, the smell of the river, the sudden whisper of a voice that I could not understand. I remember the footprints that ended abruptly, as if whatever had left them had vanished from the world entirely. I remember the eyes. I don't look at the river anymore. I don't linger. But the presence is there, always, silent, patient, waiting. I can feel it even in the city, even in daylight, in the rush of traffic, in the smell of rain on asphalt. And I know that every New Year's Eve, it will return, and I will remember the way it felt to be watched, to be small and exposed on that bridge over the black water, alone with the silence and the eyes that never blink. It's a memory I can't shake, one that doesn't fade. Every bridge, every stretch of water, every whispering wind carries it with me. I try to tell myself it's just fear, that it's just imagination, but I know better. The river waits, the figures wait, and I know I'll never be free from the weight of that night. Every time the moon catches the water, just so, every time the boards creak beneath my feet, I feel it. A presence, patient and silent, waiting for the next New Year's Eve. And sometimes, in the corner of my mind, I hear that faint, unintelligible whisper again, and I know that somewhere, on that bridge, the eyes are still following me.